Guys, Bali mentioned about you sending in your questions, and so I would like to mention a question that came in now because it is all related to our chapter we're going to do now. So I'm going to refer to the question that's, it's actually 3 questions that were sent in from Mpendulu Bai, and this learner says, which details are normally included in an employment contract? In other words, what are the elements that should be on a legal binding contract? The second question is, the basic conditions of employment stipulates that workers should work more than how many hours per week? So what are the effective hours per week that a worker should be working legally? And the third question from this learner, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act stipulates that workers should be paid what rate for overtime? Now, Mpendulu, I like to keep things interesting, so I'm not going to answer you straight away. However, I'm hoping that you are watching and your friends and the other tourism learners are focusing, because what you have asked is exactly what this whole chapter is about. And when we get to those 1 or 2 elements, I will just remind you that here's your answer. All right, guys, our next chapter is chapter 23, the Basic Conditions of Employment, Act number 75 of 1997. So this is the official act by the government of South Africa, and let's see what it's all about, because when it comes to working officially, there are certain things that needs to be in place for the worker and from the employer side that is supposed to be legal. And the Basic Conditions of Employment Act stipulates exactly what the employer and the employee can expect in this relationship. Whether you are in the tourism industry or any other industry, there are specific rules and regulations that you have to abide by. All right, so let's have a look. The Basic Conditions of Employment Act, you should take note that it is part of our South African Constitution, which everything is based upon in South Africa. It provides guidelines to ensure realistic working conditions for workers and employers, and it's very important, it's in writing. You see, you always have to have everything in writing when it comes to business, just to back yourself up and to remind yourself. It provides right and fair labor practices to make sure people are treated with respect and dignity, and it's fair, and it's also there to advance economic development and social justice in the workplace. Now, guys, as you can see there, basically the Department of Labor is our national department that deals with most of our labor-related issues when it comes to conditions of employment. So now you might ask yourself, who is the Act for? Is it only for certain people? Must you be of a certain age? When do I know the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is talking specifically to me and my employer when I officially work? Here's your answer. For everyone working more than 24 hours a month in total, the Act is for you. It excludes, of course, your senior managers, which might work more hours or different hours, and also our traveling sales staff. However, there's also a determination in the Hospitality Sector Act of 2007 that stipulates specific conditions for people working in the tourism industry. Now, let me remind you, when we talk about tourism industry, what we're talking about. It's a lot, guys. Let's go through this list quickly. It's hotels, motels, inns. It's a smaller form of hotel. Our resorts, it can be holiday resorts, game lodges, that's normally in the bush where you can have an experience, and the game refers to wildlife being present. Our hostels, we find that overseas a lot, backpacker hostels where you can sleep over at affordable prices. We also have guest houses in our country. We have guest farms where you can have a farm experience but still have the luxury of sleeping in a tourism institution. We have our bed and breakfast, we have our fast food outlets, our restaurants, pubs, taverns, cafes, tea rooms, coffee shops, our snack bars, our catering industry or function industry, and then any other contracts and commercial business. So guys, basically, if you work in this industry, especially in the tourism industry, you are covered by the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So always make sure when you sign up for a work, You literally sign up. You have to know what's expected of you, and you need to make sure it's in writing. You need to sign it, and the employer needs to sign it. That will be your formal agreement. All right. So, working hours. Mpendulo. There's your answer. When we work 45 hours per week. Now, we all know a week in our mind is normally 7 days. So in those 7 days, you work 45 hours. That's the guidelines or the regulations of the Act. It's broken into two parts. For example, if you work 9 hours a day, you have to work 5 days or less in a week. If you only work 8 hours a day, you can work more than 5 days. For example, from a Monday to a Saturday as agreed upon. When we work overtime, and this was another question, however, we will come to the remuneration in just a short while. If you work overtime, you cannot just decide you want to work overtime. You have to be in agreement with your employer. Both parties need to agree. And then there's limitations. You cannot work more than 10 hours a week. In other words, from the Monday to the Saturday or even the Sunday or so, in total, if you add all your extra hours after the standard 8 or 9 hours per day, you cannot work more than 10 hours per week. Or it says here, you cannot work longer than 12 hours a day. So sometimes people are hard up for money and they want the experience, and so they've just worked a 9-hour shift or so, and they tell the boss, I'm good, I'm fine, I want to go on, I'll work another 6 hours, I'll go home at 10 o'clock tonight, that's fine. It's not fine. If the boss says yes, he's breaking the law. If you insist on it, you are breaking the law. So you cannot work longer than 12 hours a day, and then also not more than 5 days in a week. You have to rest. Now, what do they say here about working on Sundays and public holidays? Again, it needs to be in an agreement. Both parties, the worker and the employer, agrees. And then it says here, now we come to payment. A public holiday, if it is on a work day, you have to be paid double wage. If you work on a Sunday, and that Sunday is normally part of your work, let's say you work shifts and it turns out that you have to work this Sunday, whatever your wage would have been for that Sunday or for any other day, you have to get 1.5 times the value of that wage for that specific day. All right, continuing with working hours. If you are a worker that works at night, in certain industries, we classify night work from 6 o'clock in the afternoon or so up until 6 o'clock in the morning, and this also needs to be per agreement. You have to be paid an allowance, or you have to have reduced work time in the long run for this agreement to be effective. And very important, transport needs to be arranged or subsidized. Now what that means is, normally, if you make use of public transport, it's either not available as frequently as in the day when you work at night. So if you have to use other means of transport to be able to fulfill your night shift, it's very important that if that fare or price is more expensive than your standard traveling cost, the company must subsidize you. In other words, they must give you a travel allowance, or they must assist in paying for that transport, because they expect you to be there at night. All right, when it comes to eating or meal intervals, it's very important that every worker in your 9 or 8 hours per day of work, you have to have 60 minutes that are paid for. It's an hour that you have lunch where you get paid for that hour, although you're not working. However, if you work less than 6 hours, then it can be reduced to 30 minutes or no meal interval at all. If you are working on Sundays and on public holidays, you must understand, in the tourism industry, it's a normal. Guys, when I say it's a normal in the tourism industry, I think it's pretty clear that most of the theme parks, most of the hotels, most of the restaurants even have more customers during long weekends, during public holidays, during school holidays. So when everyone else is resting and having fun in the tourism industry, people are working at their hardest. So there's nothing wrong with it. They will just have other stipulations in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act and the Hospitality Sector Act that will stipulate how those conditions work. Okay. Continuing. Meal intervals. It says here for every 5 hours, you get a 1 hour interval meal time that's paid for. And after every day of work, you have to rest. The period needs to be 12 consecutive hours. Consecutive means it cannot be interrupted. All right, before you start your next shift the next day. And in a week, that's our 7 days, you have to rest at least for 36 consecutive hours, which most might probably include a Sunday. So that's the meal intervals and resting. Now, the one thing, if you've been a boss for a while and so, it's interesting when you sign a contract with workers and the first time you ask them, so do you have any questions regarding your work? The worker might probably say, so how does leave work? Because people know when I start working, I'm going to work hopefully for life to earn an income, but that means resting time will be limited, family time, all of that. So the most important thing you would want to know as a worker is, what is my leave arrangements? In other words, when am I allowed not to be at work? Let's have a look. Workers are entitled to, and this is the different type of leave you get. Sick leave. Now this is when you fell ill and you can't go to work. Of course, you're going to have proof, so it's always wise to have a doctor's letter that confirms that you are sick and booked off. Then we have our normal annual leave, which is basically when we take our 21 days for the year. We can take it consecutively at the end of the year, or we can take, if your company policy allow it, throughout the year, a few days at a time. For women, especially in their young ages, your maternity leave, of course you cannot stay there up until the baby comes and then you sit with the baby at work, so you get maternity leave. These days I know paternity leave also plays a role where the daddy can actually support the mommy at home with the baby for a few days. It's allowed. You will have that doctor's letter to confirm that you are a daddy. All right, and then your family responsibility leave. So with family responsibility leave, it's basically when you have a situation where your someone fall ill, your child, maybe your wife has a situation at work, or your husband, and you need to look after matters. It's also when you actually maybe have to attend a funeral that's personal to you. That's all family responsibility leave. All right. Our annual leave is normally 20 days consecutive, which means it includes every day, Monday to Sunday, in that sequence. And as a worker, if you've just started working, you get 1 day for every 17 days that you have worked. Guys, very important, if you are absent from work and you don't have a valid reason or so, you cannot be paid. So that will be unpaid leave. So it's very important to always have a valid reason. If you have worked for 3 years or longer, you get 6 weeks of sick leave. That is a lot, I know, but doesn't mean you have to take it all and plan when you're going to be sick. It just tells you that if you have to go for surgery or something serious, you will be excused from work for 6 weeks paid with a valid doctor's reason. During the first 6 months of work, the worker can get 1 day of sick leave for every 26 days work. So that's normally for people who have just started working and you've not accumulated that much sick leave or so, or over a certain period of time. Then for women with babies, you get 4 months maternity leave. However, the company's policy can state whether that is paid for or not paid for. And then full-time workers can take 3 days responsibility leave after the first 4 months of work. Okay. Uniforms. When you work for a company and they must supply you with uniforms free of charge. This is very important. If your boss tells you, I want you to wear A, B, and C, and it must look like this, it must be this color shirt, they specify exactly what it must look like, but you must pay for it. It's not according to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. If they expect you to wear a uniform, they must supply you with the uniform, especially in the retail industry and in the tourism industry. Other workers who have to wear specific styles can also be supplied with 1 uniform in a year. However, workers who need protective clothing or specific gear to accomplish their work must receive new gear at least twice a year. That's very important. The company is responsible for that. Remuneration. Now guys, when it comes to remuneration, everyone knows it as a salary or payment. So obviously you work to earn money, and when you earn money, that money will be paid by the employer, and it can be decided upon whether that payment will be daily, or it will be once a week, or it will be monthly. And then you can also, both parties agree, will it be in cash, will the company give you a check, or the standard procedure is to normally pay the money into your bank account. What is very important, and this is something that everyone should take note of, in our country we have something called minimum wage. Now minimum wage is stipulated and specified for every single industry. So it's not a standard one. It's for every industry. They'll indicate what's the minimum salary you must get, either per hour, per day, per week, or per month. All right. Employees should never pay for their own training that is compulsory by the work. They should also never pay for equipment and safety equipment that they have to use in the line of duty. If you work on Sundays occasionally, you get double the pay. And if you work every other Sunday or so, not in a specific sequence that it's every Sunday, you get 1.5 the rate of your fare for the day. Public holidays, sometimes you find that we can stay at home on a public holiday. That means you will get a normal payday for that day of work, although you didn't actually work. You must, and this is also very important, receive a pay slip. Now guys, for those of you who have never worked before, a pay slip is a document that the employer gives you that's formal. On that pay slip it says exactly what was your gross income or what was paid to you. However, that does not necessarily mean it's what you're going to get in your bank account, because there are a few deductions that you have to agree upon with your employer that will be deducted, and eventually you get paid a net salary. So you must have a pay slip. If you one day want to apply for bonds or finance on cars or anything, or you need to prove that you are working, they will ask you for a minimum of 3 months worth of bank statements or pay slips. So a pay slip must be provided to you. Now the money deducted from your salary or your remuneration are normally in the form of UIF. It's our unemployment insurance fund, something that's very important today. As I know here in South Africa, many people are claiming at this stage because they've lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 situation. All right, we also can have our workers or our employer deduct medical aid if that's part of the package. Also, it deducts retirement fund contributions. If you want to belong to a union, you can deduct those fees, or the work can deduct those fees and pay it over. If you have a home loan, you can ask your boss to deduct it from your salary before they pay you. And this is a non-negotiable and ethical one. We have to pay tax to SARS. All right. Benefits. Now, benefits are something that employee receives in addition to a salary or a normal wage. It's something extra. So it can be in the form of extra money for extra work you have done, or it can be in the form of equipment that you are allowed to use outside the company, or services that you are allowed to use. It is a benefit. Let's say you work and you are a travel agent, consultant, and the company says, you know what, here's a laptop and free internet access, because sometimes I'm expecting you to work from home or do research at home. So this is a benefit that comes with the salary. You don't pay for that laptop, but at the end of the day, when you leave the job, you're going to give it back to us. But it's something you can use for personal use as well. It's a benefit. Another word that's important that might be new to you are fringe benefits. Now, fringe benefits are benefits that is part of our job. So it's those extra benefits that complement the job. In other words, if you travel a lot for the job, let's say you need to take customers out and do business deals or so, the company must pay for that lunch or time break away. You're not supposed to pay for it from your pocket. Also, if you need to get petrol or your cell phone costs or so, you can get those type of allowances, especially when it contributes to you doing your work. That's called fringe benefits. All right, travel benefits, guys. Again, I'm coming back to when you work night shift, which is normally the case in the tourism industry, in some sectors. When you work night shift, your company needs to give you a travel allowance, or if you use public transport and the fare is higher than the standard fare at night, they need to subsidize it. In other words, pay on your behalf. Transport must be available to workers, and very important, like I say, if transport is not available at the specific price, the company needs to arrange for you to be collected and dropped off again. Those are for the times of night shift, and it's normally when it comes to the times 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning. I want to quickly explain to you the definition of a job description. Now, understand this, you have your contract, and we'll get to that now, how a contract must look and what should be on it. But very important, the job description basically tells you what your responsibilities will be. Because all these elements are legal, if you sign and the employer sign and you agree that this is the specific functions you will comply with and do as a worker, then you will be held accountable. In other words, liable. So there can be action against you if you do not fulfill these requirements and you don't do your job right. Or if you need assistance, the worker or the employer must be the one that gives you training on that. So that's very important to understand a job description. However, let's get back to professional accountability as part of service ethics. So a lot of writing here. The impact that professional accountability have is the fact that workers must receive a detailed description of what is expected of them. That's why I just explained to you what is a job description. All right, in that document, whatever is signed and agreed upon must be fair. It must be honest behavior that is expected in the workplace. It must have a form of confidentiality. You don't always talk about everything with everyone. It must have high standards, and it must hold you as a worker liable for what's expected of you. When it comes to service ethics, on the other hand, service ethics is basically what the company stands for, and do the company have moral values? For example, when it comes to child labor, there are certain instances where you can employ a person under the age of 18, but there are so many strict rigid guidelines to that. Let's have a look. Ethically, the moral framework of a company states that no child under the age of 18 legally can be employed. Well, I say legally, you can obviously not even employ someone illegal. You can go to jail for that. No under 18s where alcohol is served. Now, I'm immediately thinking of the tourism industry where there are restaurants and where people are served. So it's very important that children under 18 do not come close to delivering a service where there's alcohol involved and where it affects the well-being, their education, physical or mental health, which can be at risk. All right, if you have employed a child under the age of 18, it's very important to have those records available at any time for a maximum time of 3 years. And then very important, companies must make sure there's no discrimination in the workplace. So discrimination is something that's very serious because people get discriminated against based on their skin color, their background, their knowledge, their experience. There are so many diverse elements that people get discriminated against, and that must never happen in the workplace. The workplace must be a safe environment for everyone. The company should be held accountable if something is not right, or a worker if a worker steps out of line. All right. Accountability structure. There's another form of accountability from the company side where businesses can actually use performance appraisal to get their workers more involved in the company and to make sure that the workers actually go that extra mile. So what happens here is it normally comes in the form of a system that's designed to benefit workers that goes the extra mile. So your bosses evaluate your work and they look at how you conduct yourself, and they actually make sure that you get benefit from it in the form of a bonus or an increase, a higher salary if you've done your work correctly. So that's also a form of accountability from the employer side. Now, We said at the beginning that the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is a legal thing. It is how the worker and the employer interact and agree upon certain things that's stipulated by the law. Now, I keep saying the word law because it means there should be an enforcement of the law. If someone breaks a rule here, it's not just you breaking a rule, it's something serious that you can go to jail for or get a penalty or a fine. So it's very important to understand all the ways you can report a breach, or all the ways where you can leave a grievance. A grievance is when you complain about something, and you're allowed to complain. That's also a right that workers have. A company also have a right to complain if a worker do not do their job right. So let's have a look how the law is enforced. So it's based on the labor law and our Bill of Rights, which explain the human rights of every South African, and BCEA is the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So issues or grievances, if it can't be resolved between a worker and an employer, it's important that you know you can go to the CCMA. Now the CCMA stands for Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. In short, guys, the CCMA is an independent entity, free from political stance, free from unions and they specializes in the law on labor relations. So if you have a grievance as a worker, you're unhappy with something, you can't resolve it in the workplace, the boss is not listening to you, or after a lot of talk, nothing happened, and you have a foot to stand on. Even if you don't think you've got a foot to stand on, you can go to the CCMA and they will deal with the matter, because they will look at the policy, the procedures that was followed, and the principles of management in the company. However, we also must take note that we get labor inspectors from the Department of Labor. They can go into a company and look at all the rights and obligations and inspect that company if there were any complaints and try to resolve the matter. If these labor consultants or inspectors make a recommendation or decision and the company or the worker disagrees with it, it can be challenged in the labor court. Workers may not be treated unfairly. Very important. There cannot be discrimination against you if you use these routes to find out about something that you feel was not done correctly or if the law was broken. So the Act protects you, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Okay. Termination of service. When you come to the end of your contract, some contracts can be for a year, some contracts are per month, or some contracts don't have an ending. But if you want to resign, or the company wants to fire you, or the company wants to end your service for a specific reason, it's a process basically that must be in writing. So the employer needs to write you a notice, or you write the notice to the employer, and there's normally a notice term connected to it. If an employee has worked for more than 24 hours, you have to give 1 week notice. If you were employed for less than 6 weeks, you have to give 2 weeks notice that you're leaving the job. If you have been employed for more than 6 weeks, but less than a year, sometimes even longer after a year, the standard procedures is 4 weeks or 1 month. A worker is entitled to a service certificate which explains to you, or whoever reads it, what type of job you did. And if the employer terminates the service due to operational requirements, you have to be paid severance pay. So basically, if you are retrenched, that means the employer cannot afford to have you anymore. They ask you to leave. You didn't do anything wrong. There's no bad feelings or vibes, but you cannot work there anymore. That can happen, and then they need to pay you severance pay, which is basically 1 week of your salary for every year of completed work that you have done for this company. All right. Now, let's get to what is an employment contract. Employment contract is a written legal document that sets out required terms and conditions. So you and the company agrees upon certain conditions. It is to reduce uncertainty. It is to reduce disputes or arguments. It is also there to give you your rights and to understand your rights. It regulates your behavior because it tells you exactly what's expected of you. And most importantly, it is a legal binding document that can be used. All right. The question that I'm about to answer now from our learner that's sent it in Bentulu. Information needed on a contract. What should be written on your contract to make it a legal contract? Well, there's two parties. So, of course, it must be the full names and the address of the employer, your name as the worker, which occupation you will enter into, and the place where the work is expected to be done, the premises, and also the date on which you must start your work is very important. Then, how many days will you work and what are the times? You need to know what time to arrive to work and what time you will leave work. Salary, very important. Workers want to know what they'll be paid and how often. We said it can be every day, every week, or every month. You need to know if you are expected to work overtime, what the payment for that will be, and you need to know what will the period of notice for termination be. And then, I mentioned it earlier, the job description. That is the document that tells us basically what your job will consist of every single day.